To maintain and improve performance in any given sport or athletic event, you need to train. Without training, the body is not properly conditioned for physical activity. Training helps to maintain and build on fitness. Being fit for any sort of physical activity involves complex chemical reactions and physiological responses within the body, particularly in the muscles. The three different energy systems, the two anaerobic systems, ATP-PC and lactic acid, and the aerobic system, all come into play during any type of physical activity. Training can help develop and improve all three systems. Training helps the body synthesise the energy it needs and dispose of waste products it does not need more efficiently. It is designed to prepare the body for many different effects it undergoes when playing sport or competing in an event. There are many aspects to training, and we'll look at some of them in this program. We'll examine training principles, considerations when developing a training program, training methods, and physiological responses to training, both acute and chronic. There are a number of different training principles. They include duration, frequency, intensity, progressive overload, and specificity. Duration is the period over which a program lasts. In general terms, to notice anaerobic improvement, a duration period of between 6 and 12 weeks is recommended. For improvements in the aerobic system, allow 6 to 8 weeks. Frequency refers to the number of training sessions within a period of time, usually a week. It's not simply a case of training whenever possible. The body also needs time to recover from training. Generally speaking, 3 to 5 sessions per week are recommended for aerobic improvement and 3 sessions per week for anaerobic improvement. But frequency is often higher for athletes competing at the elite level.
Frequency, again, you're looking at volume as well, how many sessions you're doing per week. So there's not only the intensity of a single training session or what you're doing within a session, there's the amount of sessions the players are doing per week. Now, you've certainly, to play at international level, you've gradually got to start building that volume up.
Intensity refers to the exertion level at which training is done. Intensity is commonly measured as a percentage of maximum heart rate that results out of a training exercise or session. Athletes who move into the elite levels of performance often have to become used to increased training intensity and frequency.
Particularly when athletes first come into this program, because the volume of work we do, the amount of work we do here is a lot higher than usually what they've come from, whether they've come from a state academy or a club situation within their state. The intensity that we work at and the volume is a lot higher.
Progressive overload is an important training principle. The body adapts to a greater workload during a training session, and progressive overload is needed to avoid performance levels reaching a plateau. Progressive overload can involve increasing one or more aspects of training, such as distance, time, recovery time, number of sessions per week, and weights used in resistance training. But it needs to be managed carefully.
So with an athlete with a progressive overload, you can either overdo it or underdo it, so it's very important that you prescribe the training on a weekly basis and daily basis that fits the athlete. And it's very easy to overcook that, and it's very easy to undercook that. So you really have to know the athlete very, very well.
Finally, specificity. It is the principle of replicating components of the sport in the training program. Consideration should be given to the muscle groups and energy systems used in the sport, the fitness components, and the skills performed. When an athlete specialises in an event or a sport, specificity in training is critical. A champion long jumper, for example, won't spend a lot of time doing long runs or bicycle rides because they do not involve physical activity that is specific to the event.
duration of event for a jumper or a sprinter would be a lot of short work, sprint work over 60, 70 metres, so we're talking lasting 5-6 seconds in duration. He would do longer running, up to 150, 200 metres, and they'll last up to 25, 26 seconds, say. But beyond that, there's not a lot of 30-minute, 40-minute runs that he would do. That would be more aligned to a distance athlete.
For those involved in team sports, specificity in training is also about developing good habits on the field, reacting the right way in certain situations, and making good decisions. A number of different training principles apply that are important in designing a training program. Duration is the time a training program lasts. Frequency refers to the number of sessions in a week. Progressive overload ensures that performance levels do not plateau. A number of variables can be increased to achieve progressive overload. Specificity is replicating game or event conditions in training. There are a number of considerations to take into account when developing a training program. Diminishing returns is one. Diminishing returns refers to the amount of improvement a person makes as a result of the training. An unfit person makes rapid improvement when they start training, but as soon as they become fitter, the rate of improvement slows. Sometimes training programs have to be stopped. Often it's because of injury. This brings on a time of detraining, which results in a loss of condition. In general, a significant loss in conditioning occurs after 2 to 6 weeks. When it comes time to start training again, it needs to be planned carefully. Duration, frequency, intensity, and progressive overload must all be revised. In any training program, for any level of athlete, variety is important.
So the variety tends to happen on the surfaces we use or the type of training we do, the type of games we play within a session, and that gives a variety and change of stimulus. Certainly when athletes are in a program over a long period of time, that variety and stimulus is important to keep them enjoying things.
Periodisation is another consideration. This refers to organising a training year into phases, where each phase has specific aims for an athlete's development.
Our training program is broken down into several aspects because we're a development program. So we look at the individual and we look at the skill-based acquisition and fundamental acquisition. We then build that up over the process of the year, and we build that up towards competition phase, where we'll lead up with individual aspects into team concepts, and then team concepts, of which we're in at the moment because we're preparing for competition in a month's time, is far more advanced.
Warming up, warming down and recovery are also important considerations.
Warming up, we believe, is very important to increase the elasticity of the muscle, which is important in good performance as well as preventing injury. So usually a warm-up will consist of a low-intensity effort with some stretching. If the event involves high intensity, there'll also be small high-intensity components in that warm-up.
After a session or event, it is vital that muscles and body systems are given the time and environment to recover from the impact of the physical activity.
Generally speaking, we have some core recovery elements that we do for all sports. So things like warming down, stretching, massage are all core basics of good recovery. We also introduce hydrotherapy as well for most sports.
But it is also important to tailor recovery sessions to suit different athletes and different sports.
Yeah, each of the sports has very different demands on them. So, for example, swimmers don't have a lot of muscle damage because their body weight's supported in the water, but they do get a lot of neural fatigue and a lot of glycogen depletion, so they're using a lot of fuels. So for them, different recovery strategies are important, but for swimmers particularly, they do a high volume of training both in the water and on dry land. Our soccer players, it is very important again for them because they have a lot of impact on the ground and they do a lot of running in their games. So so we target recovery specifically to that. And sprinters, although they don't tend to do a high volume, they do very short, sharp, high quality sessions. So they might only do 3 or 4 sprints in a session, but get very, very fatigued from that because there's a high neural demand.
Other considerations need to be taken into account when planning a training program. They include diminishing returns, which relates to the slowing of improvement with training over time. Detraining and retraining are important, particularly when injured. Variety of training prevents boredom and the loss of motivation. Periodisation is the breaking up of a training year into phases. Warming up, warming down and recovery are critical aspects of a training program. So how do athletes train? A range of different training methods are used. Continuous training is part of many athletes and sports people's regime. It is the most common type of training and the best type of training to maintain general health and well-being. Continuous training is undertaking any activity that requires aerobic activity for at least 20 minutes. For example, running, cycling, cross-country skiing and aerobic exercises. It is submaximal and to be effective needs to keep the heart beating at around 75% of its maximal rate. The aim is to increase aerobic capacity. The aerobic energy system is the most efficient and is needed for most sports. Continuous training also increases the anaerobic threshold. Fartlek is a Swedish word meaning speed play. Fartlek training involves regular changes of pace. It might be achieved through hills or obstacles on the training track, or a series of short sprints combined with slower jogging or walking. Fartlek training increases aerobic fitness, but also increases the capacity of the lactic acid system. Interval training involves intervals of work, followed by intervals of rest or recovery. It can be designed for specific energy systems. The length of time of intervals determines which energy system benefits.
So interval training does make up a large percentage of, say, a middle distance athletes training program, and again a lot of team sports would engage themselves in doing interval type training with very short recoveries, some high intensity work but repeated over a period of time, and that can last, again, depending on the nature of the sport or the nature of the particular event. Say an 800 metre runner, he would go through or she would go through repetition bursts over 200 metres or up to 400 metres off short recovery, and they might get through 10 lots of those.
For those playing team sports, interval training is also important. It is an effective way of replicating game conditions. For example, intervals of time when chasing an opponent, followed by an interval of rest. Resistance training builds muscular strength and endurance. It involves the use of weights or a resistance force. There are 3 types of resistance: isotonic, which involves weights; isometric, which involves a fixed resistance; and isokinetic, meaning the resistance offered by a machine. Plyometrics are exercises based on scientific findings that muscle development is enhanced by rapid changes in muscle length while resistance is being applied.
Plyometrics, yeah, look, it's a series of activities, leaping, jumping, hopping, movements. Every athletic event involves plyometrics, and really you're challenging the elastic muscle structure, if you like, and you're trying to stimulate that, and through the stretch shortening cycle of the muscles, stretch being when it's being loaded eccentrically and then shortening concentrically, you're getting a very quick turnaround in terms of how the muscle reacts.
2 other types of training are circuit training and flexibility training. Circuit training involves moving between stations on a circuit, where different exercises are carried out. It is used for skill development and can also be incorporated with other training methods.
Yeah, circuit training is a good conditioner for athletes, and it just really comes back to how creative you want to be. It is a good muscle endurance development activity, aerobic capacity activity, and again, it can be done with weights, without weights. It can be done outside. You can incorporate medicine balls, you can incorporate running, you can incorporate running drills. You can make it as simple as hard as you want.
Flexibility training involves stretching and extending various muscle groups to achieve higher levels of flexibility. As with any type of exercise, care must be taken.
You do flexibility training to warm yourself up for a particular event. Some athletes will need more, others will need less. I think a lot of athletes overstretch, some understretch. Some should employ more ballistic type movements, others should not. And again, it depends on the physical nature and structure of the athlete you're working with.
Continuous training is undertaking aerobic activity for 20 minutes or more. It is submaximal. Fartlek training involves changes of pace during training. Interval training has periods of exertion followed by periods of rest. Resistance training involves the use of weights or a resistance force. Plyometrics extends muscles while resistance is applied. In circuit training, an athlete moves between exercise stations, and flexibility training concentrates on improving muscle and joint flexibility. Acute responses relate to the short-term effects that training has on the body.
Acute responses to training, when you're actually doing the activity, you get an increase in ventilation because you have to provide more oxygen to the muscles. Your heart rate goes up because you need to provide more blood flow so you can produce energy.
Let's look at some of these acute responses in a bit more detail. When the body is exercising, a number of acute responses occur in the respiratory system. More oxygen is taken in. There is an increase in heart rate, which means that a greater volume of oxygenated blood is transported to various parts of the body. To provide the increased oxygen, ventilation or the rate of breathing increases. At rest, a person typically takes around 12 to 15 breaths per minute. This can increase to 3 or 4 times that rate during certain types of exercise, such as running a 400 or 800 metre event. Tidal volume also increases. This refers to the amount of air taken in and out with each breath. At rest, tidal volume is typically around 0.5 litres, but can increase to 5 times that amount during strenuous exercise. Oxygen uptake, also known as VO2, increases with exercise. As you start exercising, VO2 increases as more oxygen and more aerobic energy